There's a website you can go to if you feel like doing it that shows you all the positive ranking factors that Google uses to position things on websites. If you go to that website, it'll basically say do things like have lots of backlinks into your site and make sure that the text on the page is very easy to read and that kind of stuff. Basically, the last year's presentation was basically take everything on that list and reverse it. If you do the exact opposite of everything in that list against your adversary, you effectively knock them out of the search engine ranks and you go up. So this is a very super duper common tactic that's being used. Specifically the backlink strategy. So what people do is they'll create thousands of backlinks. Those backlinks are from bad neighborhoods. They'll point it at your site. Your site will disappear from the search engine because they believe you're in a bad neighborhood and you're link stuffing or you're just basically spamming Google. So basically Google uses that as a ranking factor in the negative sense. It actually penalizes you. So I talked all about that last year. If you didn't see it, you're screwed. Very brief primer on negative SEO, just so you know what I'm talking about here. Effectively, if there is some sort of badness, and that badness isn't just incompetence, so it's not just like, whoops, I forgot that, I have 404s all over my website or something. If that is something that's directly something that's actively done on the site, and it is something that Google can identify, effectively that can change the search engine rankings. That is something that could be manipulated by a third party, depending on what we're talking about. In many cases, like the backlink strategy, I could just create a bunch of backlinks from bad neighborhoods and point them at you. And that doesn't necessarily mean you've done anything wrong, but Google will treat that as a ranking factor and actually knock you out of the search engine. So that's a very simple tactic, and it works very, very, very well. It's just not something that's extremely common, and more importantly, and I'll get to this near the end, Google isn't really doing anything about it, which is even more interesting for various reasons. But anyway, one of the things that is a ranking factor that I didn't really talk about last year that I think is very interesting is site speed. Site performance in particular is something Google cares a lot about. And there's various reasons for it. If you pay attention to the fact that they have moved into AMP, who here is even familiar with that term, AMP? Does that, anyone? Literally, okay, like 1, 2 people? Very, very important. So if you go in your mobile browser and you type in like Trump CNN into Google, you'll see a little thing, little like carousel that'll have some article about Trump, and it'll probably be from CNN, probably, which is more interesting. If you swipe to the right of that, you'll probably see something from Breitbart. If you swipe again, you'll probably see something from MSNBC or something. And you keep swiping, and you won't see CNN anymore. And what Google has done is they've effectively started caching all of the search results local to them, something called like ampproject.org or something is the actual URL. And so effectively they're saying we can serve your content faster than you can serve your content, which causes all kinds of downstream problems. For instance, things like analytics, unless it's Google Analytics, big surprise, don't work. Ads, unless it's Google Ads, surprise, don't work, et cetera, et cetera. So effectively, they're saying that we serve our content faster than you serve your content, which, by the way, is not always true. In fact, many times, more often than not, if you know what you're doing, it's definitely not true. But it doesn't matter. They believe that they're better at it than you, and they'll bump you up in the search engine results. Therefore, everyone starts using AMP. Therefore, it is a viable method to get yourself up in the search engine ranks. And the reason why Google cares so much about speed is they believe that when a user goes to a website, they expect that site to load extremely quickly. If it doesn't load quickly for whatever reason, there's a sort of non-zero chance that what's really happening is that the user will get bored or abandon or think Google itself is broken. Because if you click on a link and then it takes, let's say, 20 seconds for the site to load, you're still sitting on Google most of the time. Like your browser doesn't refresh. It's just it's still loading, trying to pull that other content in most cases. So people who don't understand how the internet work will assume that Google's less trustworthy and that that search result isn't good. Not that the content could be perfect. It could be exactly what they're looking for, but many times, more often than not, it will give them the appearance or impression that that content is bad because it's just no data there whatsoever from their perspective. They'll bounce, they'll go back to the homepage, and that is a signal, that bounce, the fact that you go back to Google is a huge signal to Google that that site is not reputable or isn't the kind of data that the user is looking for, regardless of whether it is or not, is irrelevant. So they focus very heavily on site speed. They want the internet to be extremely fast so that people use it more often, and they use Google more often because Google makes money on ads. Last year, I got the impression that Google was trolling me. I really thought Google just legitimately didn't believe what they were saying and they were just screwing with me, because they do this pretty regularly in other contexts. But in reality, I think that they truly actually believe that negative SEO doesn't exist, which is just mind-boggling. It's because it's provable. It's actually something you can actually test. You can do it yourself on a microcosm. It is absolutely, definitively 100% true, a reality, and it's a reality that your marketing team is probably facing right now and you just don't know about it. But I really believe that they were just screwing with me, to not use French. But no, it turns out that I think they honestly believe that they're right and everybody else on the internet is wrong, which is crazy. So they're just very dangerously out of touch, and I have proof. So this is a letter that I received secondhand from a very, very high-end SEO guy. Like I'm friends with some of the best SEOs in the world, like the head of marketing for Condé Nast, the head of marketing for CBS Interactive, the head of marketing for Chicago Tribune, like the head of growth at Facebook. Like I know all of these people. I'm friends with all of them. So they'll send me stuff like because they're very interested in what we're working on in the security space. So it's very symbiotic. But anyway, I asked them, like, have you ever seen anything like Google like talking about this in any context? And yes. So this is a snippet. So how this conversation happened, a little backstory. This particular SEO was working on a particular site, and it was noticing some sort of issue with regard to ranking structure, and he was believed very heavily that there was a negative SEO campaign because everything else was correct. And keep in mind, this guy's a very good SEO, so he knows what he's doing. It's not like he's just like fresh off the boat or something. And so he basically said, hey, will you please take a look at this, to one of the head guys at the search quality team, Gary Isles. I guess, I don't know how you pronounce his name. But effectively, what they more or less said, their response was, they don't have any penalty, algorithmic or otherwise. I didn't dig into what it might be, but they probably should look elsewhere. And then pointed it upwards and said, this is effectively boilerplate text that I send to everybody in the approximately 200 negative SEO reports I've received in the past. This is what I keep sending to them, more or less, right? So out of 200 things he's looked at, he's never seen it, ever. Which is really interesting for a variety of reasons. But more importantly, what he's basically saying is, I didn't bother to check. I looked at our console. I didn't see anything obvious. That's probably not what it is, which is really, really fascinating. So I'll get back to that in a bit. So if Google is being negligent, which I think it really is, and, about the fact that this exists and not researching it themselves, which is even more interesting, I think that we can, as a community of people who want to affect other people's rankings within the search results, could theoretically leverage this to our advantage, right? So this is an attack. And I'll get to the more interesting parts about why this is a very interesting attack later on. But so let's start with something very simple. So first of all, one of the ways that you can start probing into how to screw with their site's speed and site performance is looking what else is running on that box, and also looking at where they're really located. Just because they're pointing at Cloudflare doesn't mean they're really at Cloudflare. So if you know their legacy IP addresses where they used to be hosted, you can often do something like a curl-h host, and if it responds with, yes, this is our content, they're probably still hosted on that old IP address. They've just pointed their IP at like whatever it is, like DOSRS or Akamai or Cloudflare or whatever. So you can do all kinds of really interesting things. So first of all, that's duplicate content. If you can get Google to index both of those two places, that's duplicate content. That hurts them in the search engine results. But it has all kinds of other applications. If you know that there's many things pointing on that one IP address, for instance, you can attack something, a different host name on that same IP, and affect the site performance globally across that entire infrastructure, even though you're not hitting the one that they might be thinking of, the one they have to monitor and protect, which is kind of interesting. So first of all, let's start with the obvious one. Any DOS will do. Anything you can do to take down the website. And how many DOS attacks have we invented in our industry? I mean, more than one, a handful, right? So the obvious ones are any type of UDP congestion, you know, just send a whole bunch of like DNS requests or whatever. ICMP, do a whole bunch of ping requests. We got the old-fashioned SYN flood, like that stuff just works. And don't forget about amplification attacks, because you can do all of that stuff and just like makes other people do it on your behalf. And this works great because effectively what you're doing is you're taking down the site speed, the reliability of the entire infrastructure for extremely low amount of money. We're talking like literally, you know, a couple of bucks. We're not even talking about the more sophisticated stuff like some of the stuff that Matthew Hansen and Jeremiah Grossman did back in the day with like banner advertisements. You don't even have to do that. And that was really cheap too. That was only like $5 to take down Akamai. That's like crazy cheap, right? So ironically, one interesting thing about UDP is UDP congestion messages are one of the ways that Google measures site speed performance. So if they see UDP congestion coming back, they know that that site is probably not being able to handle whatever load it's under, so that they should slow down their crawl volume. And they should probably start treating you as an unstable website if they start getting like no reply, for instance. So you can actually use UDP congestion messages yourself to check how well your DOS attack is working from Google's perspective, which is really hilarious. You can use their own method of tracking against them, which is amazing. Okay, so Slow Loris, if you guys don't know what it is, you may leave the room now. But anyway, Slow Loris is a denial of service attack that I wrote a while back, which actually will be interesting in a second here. But there's a really great video if you've never seen it. It's really hilarious how well it works. But the reason why Slow Loris in particular is very good, and possibly Rudy as well for this type of attack, is you're not necessarily taking down the rest of the infrastructure. So if they're doing other types of uptime monitoring, or if they're logged in and trying to like do stuff on the box, it won't affect the box at all. But the website will be offline, and that's all you really care about. In fact, you can even do some really interesting things, like you can like allow Slow Loris to open one socket or whatever. So it'll still get one thread through, but only one thread through. So it'll be very spotty, like it'll be up and then it'll be down, it'll up and down, even though it's under attack the entire time. So instead of opening exactly 256 sockets, you can open 255 sockets, or whatever, one less or whatever. So there's just that single thread that can make it through. That kind of thing will dramatically reduce site speed, which is pretty gnarly. Interestingly enough, I was doing some research on this for this presentation, and so I typed in DDoS tools, and there's this thing about the rich snippet on Bing, which I use, and it's great, you should totally use it too, is like other DDoS attack tools such as Slow Loris were developed by gray hat hackers. It's like, literally they're calling me a gray hat hacker on the homepage of I'm the guy who wrote that. So I'm gonna reach out to the Bing guys, like, could you please like not put my like specifically me, but whatever. So I guess I'm technically the definition of a gray hat by virtue of Bing, but anyway. So there's a whole bunch of things you can go out and play with yourself that will check the site speed performance of whatever's going on with that website. And I'm sure there's even more than this, but this is a pretty comprehensive list. Each one of these will show you the parts of the web pages that are non-performant. So maybe like a script tag that's going slow, or an image that's loading slowly, or whatever. And so these are the techniques that SEOs currently use to do this. You can actually leverage this for your own attack, which is pretty hilarious. You can just see, is the site speed getting worse when I do this thing to them? So instead of improving it, I'm sort of removing it. So basically using the exact tool in reverse, which is how negative SEO works. So another thing you can do is you can actually leverage the components of the web page against the attacker. So last year I might have talked about this a little bit. There is a technique you can basically put, anytime they have a banner ad that's on the web page, you can just make that banner ad, if you control it, load extraordinarily slowly. You can actually use the advertising system against itself and basically reduce the total viability of that web page significantly. So things like script tags, images, iframes, link tags as well, I should have added that in there. All of that stuff can be blocking depending on what we're talking about. And that's what we're looking for, is blocking content, stuff that slows the page down. So I invented something that could actually be leveraged for that. I'll talk about that in a second. So now you're going to say, like, Robert, everyone uses caching proxies. Like, this shouldn't be a problem. So that's sort of true and it's sort of not true. First of all, what you're really trying to do is make the entire site slow. So certain pages are just literally non-cacheable, like things like login pages sometimes, search pages and that kind of stuff. So you can make parts of the site slow even if you can't make the whole site slow, which is kind of interesting. And also, even if it's cached, and this is the important part, the embedded content isn't necessarily cached as well. If you control the embedded content, even if the home page is cached, it doesn't matter because you're pulling in this piece of JavaScript remotely. That thing isn't cached because it's under your control and you can slow the entire page down. So once you've broken in somehow, let's say, to the website and injected this little piece of image tag or iframe or whatever, you can effectively close that down. So your caching proxies do not matter in this context. One of the things I built was something called query stringify, and it's this stupid little piece of PHP that all it does is if you link to like an image tag or whatever, it'll send them, it'll basically do a 301 back to the attacked site and add a query string to it. And it's always unique, it's always different, and it's always hard to predict. And therefore, it is very easy to do cache busting just by pointing an image tag at this piece of code. It's written in PHP, so it's super portable. Effectively, what this does is it allows the attacker to make many queries to your website, busting through the caching proxy, hitting the origin host, because caching proxies allow query strings to go through. It just pierces the proxy. So very straightforward. Has a whole bunch of features. One of the most important is a debug feature. So it basically will not turn itself on if you need to debug it. It'll just say this is what would have happened. It has a be nice feature. If you say I want to be nice, that means you're not going to do the redirection. Which means you can turn this on and off depending on when you want to. So this is a completely remote, portable piece of code that you can enable, disable anytime, willy-nilly. And then, of course, the URL that you eventually want to send the query stringify redirects to. So very easy. So where you would do this, let's say, is any sort of slow or heavyweight pages. There's a number, I think Hacktix did something about this probably about a decade ago. Effectively, they took 3 or 4 machines on regular business class DSLs, nothing special, and just hammered any particular website they went after, and they just hit the search box with effectively AND operators. So whenever you search for something and something, you're actually doing 2 queries in whatever language you're talking about. By virtue of doing 2 queries, you're doubling up the amount of workload on the box. So you do 3 and then 10 or whatever. And you just keep hitting it with those queries like over and over again. Basically just use a dictionary attack and just cycle through dictionary words or whatever. And effectively, the site just cannot handle that. In fact, one thing I found when I was writing Slow Loris I thought was interesting is even if the web server can handle, let's say, 256 concurrent threads at a time, or let's say 1,000, whatever the number is, right? Even if that's true, the database is usually set at about 100. So it actually doesn't take that much to totally bog down the back end because it just physically can't handle the amount of connections you're making. You'll start seeing 500s pop up very quickly. If Google starts seeing 500 errors or slowness, they'll just assume the site's not trustworthy and will start deranking you. So another thing I built because I really dislike AMP. I hate AMP for so many reasons. I think it takes the control away from the advertiser. I think Google's using it as a leverage point against people. I just really think it's terrible technology. I really think it makes the ecosystem much worse. And Bing is, basically everyone, but Bing including, is supporting it. So now you don't have to worry about just AMP in one location just on Google. You have to also worry about it in a different location, which is Bing. Which is all kinds of problems. But anyway, so I invented this thing called Muffler. And Muffler basically de-amps, like Muffler, like not gonna muffler. Anyway, it de-amps different websites. So basically removes that AMP project thing and turns it back into the origin host. So if you injected this, let's say in a malware, this is like being used very widely, let's say on mobile, which is very common, for Android as an example. There's just a very good article on BuzzFeed, of all things, that was somebody had found a piece of malware that was infecting like 20 million phones. basically making them click on ads. Well, you could use that same type of thing here to de-amp websites. And basically, anytime you see this link, change it back to the unamplified version. And by not being amplified, it is in fact most of the time much slower. As a result, Google will think that these people are seeing the site very slowly due to analytics and various different bounce rates, etc. So instead of passing the AMP link around, which you guys probably have seen before, it'll be something.google.com or something AMP project or whatever. Instead of doing that, you'll pass the actual IP address or actual link around. And by virtue of passing the actual link around, it actually is slower. And that will effectively take away the advantage you get out of using AMP from an SEO perspective. So who here has ever been fired like as a consultant from a company or a project? Ever? Okay, 5 or 6. I think you're all lying to me, but I think almost all of us have at some point or another. But anyway, it's bad to know that a bunch of security people cannot tell the truth. That's really horrible. But anyway. So I created something called Google Slow. So Google Slow is very similar to that query stringify, only in this context, instead of doing a redirect, it just delivers the payload extraordinarily slowly, like super duper duper slowly. And there's a whole bunch of different settings that you can use. Effectively, the most important part about this is to understand, like, it doesn't necessarily have to impact all companies everywhere or all users visiting your website or whatever. It really only has to impact Google. Google's the only one who needs to see the slow content, because what you're trying to do is get Google to believe this site is untrustworthy and slow. So effectively, there's an IP address or CIDR block. Once you put the CIDR block in there, it effectively will make it so that only Google IP addresses will ever see the slowness. So if somebody is like checking their site, it's like, no, it's nice and snappy, everything's good, but it isn't, not from Google's perspective. So it works with things like image tags, link tags, iframes, etc. And anything that's blocking or makes the page load slowly or largely or whatever, where the crawler, which by the way, for those of you who don't know, is using Chrome 41 or 42, I can't remember, which is way, way, way out of date. Anything that makes the page load very, very slowly from Chrome 42's perspective, let's say, will effectively make the search engine crawler assume that that site is untrustworthy and slow. So one thing to understand about Google Analytics is it is really, really poorly designed, like super bad from our perspective, from a security perspective, super, super poorly designed. It is literally just a piece of JavaScript that lives on a web page and determines various attributes about a piece of page. So what is like literally security 101? You don't trust user input, right? This is one of those things where you don't actually have to even go to the website to impact Google Analytics. Google Analytics is just a website that you're hitting. Now granted, it's designed to be included in a page, and most people don't understand that you don't have to go to the page to go to the content that the page is linking to. But you know, we're security people, so we know how to do that stuff. So there's this really handy dandy little website called Vreeman.com, whatever, where you can just type in the things you want Google to think, and it'll create the exact URL you need. And then you can go hit that thing directly, and it'll think you actually did hit the website that content is on. So there's a guy named Jono who works at Yoast, really high-end SEO guy, super, super, super smart. Did a great presentation at SE Oktoberfest this year on this topic about basically screwing with Google Analytics. But you can do more than just inject bad data. Like you don't have to say, hey, you're getting a lot of links from some East African website somewhere where they're thinking, oh my gosh, we're getting so much traffic from them, we should probably do something about that. You can also do things like impact the site speed performance data. Let's say there's a query, and that query is basically GA create, site speed sample rate. Typically this would be a 10, means 1 out of 10, or sorry, well, yeah, 1 out of 10, 10% of the site, of the people who visit the site will get a query that says, I would like to have the information about whether this thing is slow or fast or whatever, this little widget. So instead of it doing it 1 out of 10 times, you do it 1 out of 100, or sorry, 100 out of 100 times. And that means that effectively every single site hit you get will respond back with this little 1 by 1 image, pixel image that they use for site speed performance, right? So now you can say, hey, Google, just give me all of this pixel data, right? I want it all. So with that pixel data, then you take this little thing, which is effectively just saying, hey, I saw this thing load at this speed. And you can say, oh, it wasn't good. It was really bad. It was very, very slow. And by virtue of sending this very slow thing to it, Google starts saying, well, hey, the internet sees this site as very slow. Like, we might see it fast, but for whatever reason, this site apparently is slow. So technically, this is called cloaking. Cloaking is anytime you do something different from Google's perspective than you do the rest of the internet. We're just cloaking Google Analytics specifically, as opposed to cloaking, let's say, saying we're a gambling site when we're not a gambling site, or vice versa, right? Which is typically how you'd use cloaking. We're effectively cloaking the fact that Google leverages a piece of JavaScript which we can just emulate and attack. And so how would you do this? Well, it turns out it's very easy. You just get a botnet, and botnets are dirt cheap, and you just hit this thing a lot, and it turns out everybody in the botnet sees that page loading extremely slowly from Google's perspective, and they're like, it's a slow site. What are we going to do? We got to derank it, which is terrible, especially since there is really no practical defense against that, since it's not code that you can control. It's on the public internet. So malware is another really, really fun one. Instead of necessarily changing the code itself, just put a timer in there, say, hey, I'm not going to pull this part of the page for X amount roll of dice, like 500 milliseconds. I'm not going to hit this thing for a roll of the dice, 5 milliseconds or whatever. And so you'll see enough variability in there from a botnet's perspective that it actually will be very, very difficult to determine what is real and what is not real. So if someone's looking at the Search Console in Google, they'll have a very, very difficult time identifying that there is even a problem, other than the fact that Google's deranking them. They're like, what's going on? Like, is it backlinks? Is it, like, what is it, you know? And it turns out if you do something like this, the way Google works after a while, and this is some of Jono's research, it turns out that Google will start collapsing data. Like, it just won't show you everything anymore. And there's no way to like pick out the ones that are bad. You're like, oh, these 500 are bad or whatever. It just lumps them all together. And so you're like, I don't know, like, how are you going to pull it out again? So that turns out to be an administrative nightmare, just to figure out where the problem is. So also, you don't have to do this type of attacking all day, every day. You only need to do it whenever you need to do it, and whenever you need to do it is enough to convince Google that the site is not very performant. Time is actually on the attacker's side. If they know somebody's speaking at a conference and they're probably not looking at their Search Console, that would be a perfectly great time to do one of these attacks where from Google's perspective, it's intermittent ups and downs or whatever, but that's a clear indicator of a site that is not reliable, and they're looking for reliable websites. So if you turn it on in certain times of day and turn it off in other times of day, that can have a huge impact. That swing, that variability can have a huge impact on how Google sees your website. So that's a great way to sort of land and expand and do bigger versions of this attack. So the way to think about this problem is that Google's is basically using a graph database, more or less. I'm way oversimplifying, but I think this is important for you to understand. So if there is one vulnerable node in the network that I can use or leverage and attack, effectively it'll impact everybody else that's linked to that vulnerable node. Which is really scary, because that means that even if you are doing the best possible thing and you have all your ducks in a row and everything's perfect on your website and you monitor everything and you're not using Google Analytics in that way, and somehow you manage to prevent someone else from creating their own Google Analytics on your behalf, even if all that stuff is true and it all works perfectly, it doesn't matter if I can take out everyone that's connected to you, everyone that's giving you link equity, everyone that's pointing to you. If I can take them down, or enough of them down, or the most important ones of them down, I'm effectively degrading the importance of the links that they're sending to you. So let's say I get 10 value from this site and 50 value from this site. And that's the total amount of links I get on the internet. Like, this is a very important site, this is a sort of important site. This one goes down from 50 to 10 again. These sites are not worth that much. I'm not getting that much link equity. So therefore, if I attack that site, it is impacting my website. See what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Is everyone following that? All right, if you're not following that, none of this else is going to make sense, but whatever. Google's search engine no longer works in the traditional sense of PageRank. I don't know if you guys all know that or not, but it's very important. It no longer uses the old-timey way of just saying, hey, there's like 10 links, and those 10 links are pointing to me, and that guy's worth a lot, that guy's worth not a lot, or whatever. It's much, much, much more complicated now. Now they're using something called RankBrain, and RankBrain is AI, and everybody loves AI. And AI is really hilariously broken for all kinds of reasons. But people will legitimately say things to me like, well, like a lot of the things you're talking about, well, they're not using PageRank anymore. They're using this AI thing. The AI thing should be able to recover and figure out what the real link equity should be. These are people who don't understand AI and love Google. And I can't stand either of those people. So the problem is AI is dumb. It's really, really dumb. Like imagine the dumbest person you know, and you feed them a certain amount of information and they cannot deviate from that knowledge. It's really terrifying, and everyone's starting to use it, and it is very gameable. And so I will give you examples. So number one, who remembers Tay? Microsoft Tay? Like 2 people? Ooh, worth talking about that. All right, so Microsoft had this AI, and of course, the very first thing they did is they put it right on the internet. The number one thing you always say, like, what did we learn from Terminator? Like, you don't like just plug it in and just like have at it, right? It's just a terrible, terrible design. Anyway, so they had this chat bot that was just designed to like talk into like a 14-year-old girl or 15-year-old girl or something's voice on the internet. And instead of putting it like in a microcosm where there's like trusted individuals or something where they could test it out, make sure it was working okay, they put it on Twitter. Has anyone ever visited Twitter? Yeah? Those people are fucking horrible. I'm on there. I'm one of those horrible people. It's terrible. And so very, very quickly, Tay became extremely racist. Extremely racist. And it was talking about, killing some races and not liking races, and it was very, very, very bad. And it was a disgrace for Microsoft. They took it offline within a day. And so what did we learn from Tay? We learned you probably shouldn't release your artificial intelligence and just let it go on the public internet. That's probably not the right thing to do. But now what do you see? Like fucking everything's AI and everything's connected to the internet, and all of it is terrible. It's really, really poorly designed. I can say this, I'm on the advisory board of an AI company. It's terrible. Anyway, so I'll give you an example of how gameable this is in a microcosm, where an individual, one person on the internet can have a direct impact on the functionality of a single AI expert system. So who loves ads on their Facebook feed? Yeah, all of you? Oh, there's one. Well, you can close your ears then. So basically, I hate ads for all kinds of reasons. I think they're abusive and tracking us and horrible things. Horrible people doing horrible things. But anyway, so I decided I disliked those ads an awful lot. So I started analyzing how the system works. It actually is an expert system, just like all this other stuff. With one very major caveat, they've got people in the back end who are actually deciding whether something is or isn't a bad ad, right? So if you say, hey, this is a bad ad, they're like, okay, is it really a gun thing, or is it really like talking about killing some race or whatever? They have to have somebody manually look at those things, right? With one exception. The one exception is if I just say I'm offended, what is the person gonna do? Like, how do they know if I'm offended or not? They can't have a human go analyze that because it doesn't mean anything. Who knows what could possibly offend me? That guy could be wearing an ugly shirt and it offends me. You know what I mean? Like, there's no way that they can leverage the actual human component of their 1,000-person anti-fraud team or whatever. They just can't do that. So if you always mark things as I'm offended by them, and I don't mean like sometimes, I mean literally every single time you see an ad and I'm always offended and you always block said ad, what happens is you train the robot. The robot goes, well, I will try to not deliver that type of ad to you anymore because you are offended by it. So fast forward a month or so and it gets a new batch of ads and it cycles through its algorithm. It's done a whole bunch of analysis. It's like, okay, I think this is the right one. And it'll start pummeling you with ads, like just all the ads, just as many ads as it can throw at you. And you keep doing the same thing and just keep saying, yep, all bad, all bad. And it's like, okay. After a day or so, it'll like, oh, no, okay, I get it. And it'll stop showing you ads again. And if you keep doing that, just keep doing it. Eventually, what you're training the robot to do is like, I can't find the ad yet that will work with you, but I'm going to keep working on it. And it just keeps cycling through all of its analysis, all its permutations, keeps going over and over and over all the data, and it can never find one that it thinks won't offend me. So effectively, I have not seen an ad in, I don't know, probably almost a year. Because of this, because of that AI subterfuge. AI is based on inputs, and inputs are things that we control as an attacker community. We can go after those AI systems and then directly impact them. Even a single user, even one person manually clicking on stuff can dramatically impact the AI. So Google is literally the exact same boat. They're using the same people practically. I mean, it's like, and now that thing is in control of our rank brain effectively. And so it is just as vulnerable as Facebook and every other expert system I've seen that takes user data or TAE or anything like that. Here we have Microsoft, Facebook, and Google, right? If they can't get it right, why do we think anyone else can get it right? But here we are. Anyway. So I think it's really important to go back and think about what that Google engineer said. I think if you really dissect the words, I realize it's a little kind of bad form to dissect someone's words so carefully, but I think it's important that we all think about this. I'm paraphrasing here, but this is the important part. Referring to the website, they don't have any penalty. Keep in mind, there's a penalty that they're thinking this has to be a penalty, which is very important. Algorithmic or otherwise. What that means is there's an algorithm that has decided that there's a lot of negative links coming into this, or someone did a manual penalty, so there's a manual review team of thousands of people working at the Googleplex, actually technically all over the world. And by the way, that team has been infected by black hat SEOs who just want to see how it all works. So yeah, that team is not doing what they think they're doing. But anyway, I didn't dig into what it might be. Now, this is super duper important. Now imagine you guys are sitting there at a console inside the Googleplex, and by the way, these people who do this job are not well paid. Like, you'd be surprised. They make like way under $100,000 a year. You'd think like people who are controlling everyone's destiny on the internet would be at least making 100 grand. No, I think probably like closer to 70 grand doing this job. So you're a 70 grand analyst sitting there, and you've been delivered some tools by some Google engineers. And those tools basically give you a couple pieces of data. They say whether there has been a penalty, what type of penalty that is, whether it has been, whether there is some other sort of linking problem with it. So basic search quality, basic stuff that they'd see in the search console. And that's it. That's all you get. So everything else at that point means you have to go and open your browser and go there and click on stuff and like actually review links, which takes thousands of hours. I mean, to manually review all of the backlinks across a site it's got to be thousands of hours for an average like medium-sized business or something. But the unfortunate part is the types of attacks I'm talking about are not linking strategy problems. It's not like you have a bad neighborhood and a bunch of links coming in that those are bad. This is a completely different type of attack. And it's so different that literally the tools do not exist within the Googleplex to identify that this is happening. They just don't have them. And they might have them in a year from now, let's say, but they don't have them now. And as a result, what's happening is they're getting exhausted by these reports. Like, people will come and say, hey, I think I've got a negative SEO thing going on. Will you please check it out? And they're like, okay. They do the work, and they've done it 200 times. Let's say that number's correct. And every single time, it's been a red herring. It's been nothing, or at least nothing from their perspective. Nothing that the search boxes that are sitting in front of them will allow them to see. Which means that they are trusting the expert system. They believe TAE. You understand what I'm saying? They believe that their expert system is actually accurate and is actually giving them correct information about the linking strategy. They don't know what's going on, and they've stopped checking. They're not even checking anymore. He said, I didn't bother to check. This is terrifying. In fact, I think what this means, and I think this is probably the most important part about it, Google doesn't care about SEO. They don't care about who ranks above who else. And that is also terrifying. all they care about is that their customer support stays low, so there's not a whole lot of inbound leads. They don't want to do this type of checking. They want the expert system to give them the answer. That's number one. And number two, that people keep clicking on ads. If you show up to Google and you click on that ad, what do they care? They don't care if PetSmart is slightly below where they should normally be. They don't care if you're slightly higher. They really don't. They just want to make sure that people believe that it's good enough. It's close enough to being accurate. And that's why sometimes you're like, I swear that I should find this thing. It's just not there. I have to click to like 20 pages before I find the thing. Because they don't care. They're not really focused on that. They're just focused on making sure those ads get clicked on. So I think if you want to boil it down to the issue with negative SEO, it's simply that they don't have the tooling. They don't know what negative SEO even is, let alone have the tools necessary to go do it. They don't believe it exists, which is just mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling because I know the people doing it. These people actually legitimately exist. In fact, I was on a phone call like 2 days ago with a guy who focuses on this exact kind of thing. So this definitely exists. I mean, his primary job is cleanup work, of course. You've got to clean it up and then, you know. But I think it's very, very important to realize that they just don't have the tooling necessary. They're looking for malicious backlinks only. They're not looking for whether somebody's site is slightly slower today. They're not looking for, hey, somebody magically put in these like really incomprehensible like $10 words all over the site, so it's just not readable anymore. They're not looking for that type of exploit. They're not even thinking in that direction, nor could their expert system ever come close to being able to identify even if they tried. It's just too complicated. So Google is dumb. They're dumb because their technology is outpacing their limited human intelligence. They don't have the tooling nor the people necessary to identify why the tooling is failing. And those people are way underpaid, so it's crazy, like super underpaid. So why would they? I mean, why would you go out of your way to go dig into thousands of links for one SEO alert? Like, who cares? Just let them deal with it. Clean them up. Yeah, it'll sink a couple companies here and there, but they don't care. It's not like it matters to them or something. So the lesson learned, if SEOs continue to send red herrings, things that aren't negative SEO or appear to be negative SEO but then actually turn out to be something completely unrelated, like just a bad linking strategy or something, effectively Google will have more reason to deny that this thing even exists. They will continue to believe it doesn't exist, and they will fight us if we ever try to say, no, it really exists, like we know the people doing it. So they'll keep disclaiming negative SEO, which gives the attackers, the attack community, a very viable way to take out competitors like your site, for instance. And so that is my presentation for the day. But if you have questions, feel free to ask. But also if you want the presentation or the code, feel free to ask or just send me an email or whatever. Any questions? Yes? Oh, I don't give a crap about Google. No, I'm not particularly interested in helping Google. If that's no, but I'm sure Google will hear about this. But the important part is Google has already heard about a lot of this. Not from me, but negative SEO is a thing that at least 200 other people have asked that one guy alone about. So it's not like it's not something that's clear and present to them. It's just that they don't believe it. It's like a boogeyman or something. It doesn't exist. They've never found it, so it's not there. So regardless of the information I put in front of them, they still don't have the tooling necessary to identify it, even if they wanted to identify it. They just don't have it. It just doesn't exist.
My question was a little bit different. I'm not a big fan of Google, their tools and how their support works. They're trying to make sure that what's happening to you, not humans, and that's why you can solve anything.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so I'm busy on that. Right? But like my question was, like, if they fire back, trying to file a lawsuit against you, saying that you're making a false statement or something, do you have factual data?
Oh, I'm not worried about getting sued by Google. No. No.
They're so high that they don't care about you.
Well, they should, but no, I don't think Google's in the mood to sue a researcher over something like this. And frankly, the kinds of people who would have to get involved to sue me over this, they would make themselves a target in other ways for the kinds of people who love this type of presentation. Yes. Any other questions?
Yep.
Yes.
Robert, so what do companies do to prevent being a victim of negative SEO? Are there any steps that can be taken?
There's a number of things. So monitoring your own, well, so the short answer is no. The long answer is, of course, individually on any individual type of attack scenario, yes. For instance, if I start submitting everybody's resume in a particular company to another company and they all up and get out of their desks and leave for the day and nothing happens there, the defense looks completely different to that than it looks to this, you know what I'm saying? And the problem with negative SEO is it is effectively anything I can do to make you not rank. And so if the thing you're not doing today to rank is not writing a blog post or whatever, because you're just too busy doing other things, that the defense to that looks completely different than the defense to this. So just talking about the defense to this for a second. The short answer is you need to be checking your site speed performance in two completely different ways at all times. Number one, you should be using something like one of those 20 tools or so that I posted on that 5th slide or whatever. So that's one, but also you should be measuring the search console within Google. If Google itself ever thinks you're slow, despite the fact that you think you're fast, that would be a very good indicator that something like that's going on. The neat part about that Google slow code, though, is it can lie dormant. It can just sit there forever. So as long as I'm employed with you, your site's nice and fast. The second I'm gone, wow, maybe you guys needed me after all because your site just went like crazy down. So it's not like something that you can even necessarily correlate to the event. It could happen 6 months from now. And that's why I was asking if anyone's ever been fired, because the neat part about a lot of this stuff is you can really wait a long time and have it sort of build up. You don't have to make it all the way slow or all the way fast. You can, slowly ramp it down. And those things are detectable because things like Google Slow, for instance, cloak themselves. So only Google would see that. The delta between Google and your analytics will look very different. But that implies that you have your own analytics. And no one really does this. They rely on Google for everything, which is a terribly, terribly dumb idea. At very minimum, you should be looking at raw logs, at a very, very minimum. But ideally, you should have your own analytics as well that is well outside the purview of Google, where you can manipulate and remove things, track things much more granularly. And unfortunately, that's just expensive. It's costly. Any questions? Well, thank you very much, everybody. Love you.